I wanted to talk about, let's talk about why I want to talk about the topic. So, I was having a conversation with some of our guys that are helping us with running this academy, and we're trying to decide, we're talking about deciding on where to play and like which teams to play, what kind of games to prioritize, what kind of tournaments to prioritize, and all this kind of stuff. And I was saying this to you earlier today. It's funny when you talk to people who have kids playing or are really in it, where I can see how you can get sucked in, where it's hard to like zoom out and see the bigger picture of things. And so we're talking about who we should play and what teams to play and all this kind of stuff. And to me, when I'm listening to this conversation, I'm kind of like, I don't think it really matters that much as long as you're playing a mix of teams and it's the highest level you can play and the competition is pretty good. Like, does every single game need to be against the best team in Ontario or the best team in Michigan or whatever? So that kind of conversation was kind of sparked my inspiration for this episode, because I know a lot of people get really caught up in that kind of stuff, like who we play, what teams we're playing, where we're playing, and the look of it. And so I wanted to start on that note for you, is kind of get your thoughts on how important it is to play the best teams, or like how high of like competition do you need to be playing in order to do the things that people worry about, like get exposure, make sure scouts are there watching, etc. Because the answer is not, it doesn't matter, and it's not, it always matters. It's obviously something in the middle. So I just want to get your thoughts on that, because it's something I'm hearing more and more of, and I feel like people are getting caught up on the wrong thing, thinking it's the most important at the time. So kind of what are your thoughts on that?
Well, I think you answered probably the way I would too. Is I don't think you can. Well, first of all, you don't necessarily know what type of team you have until you start playing, right? So that could be an issue right there. You can think you're a lot better than you are, and then you're not that good, or vice versa. Um, I think it's important to have a mix for sure, because in all three situations, three really good competition, mediocre competition, and playing a lousy team, or maybe you're the lousy team, whatever. I think there's a place that reveals a lot of things about your team, no matter what. So I think that in itself is important, that you play whoever. And if you happen to be a good team, then of course you want to measure how good you are. So if you can get games against really good high competition, that's better for everybody, because it gets you like especially if you're a team, if you're not playing in championship games or those really important games. So if you're playing top teams, it could be something where it's like a championship game where you got to make sure that you're up a little bit, so it could test um, your mental attitude or your mental toughness, because that's a good measure to find out if you get way too amped up for a game or not. Just to see how you deal with that pressure. But I think it's always good to play against a team that's really good, because it's a good measuring stick for yourself to say, okay, we've got a long way to go, or we don't. Or you see players that, oh, wow, I didn't know a guy like that existed. Some good eye openers. And it's good to test your systems and all that kind of stuff. So that's good. Um, Playing just equal competition is always good as well. So that, for obviously reasons, that you can't take it too you can't take it easy, and you got to play a hard game to know that you're in a battle. And then playing weaker competition is good too, because you want to, you can't guarantee a win, but if you have times where you can get wins, it's good for any team, right? Any team, and it's how you play against. Like when you play against high level teams, so I'll just take it a different tangent here. This is from an individual or from maybe a coaching standpoint too. So a lot of times you have players that are good when the stakes aren't high, and then you'll have players that rise to the occasion. The tougher the game, or the more important the game. So when they're really getting tested, sometimes you'll see a guy that, or guys that you thought were going to really excel, and they don't. And then guys that, oh, this is their type of game. It's almost like a playoff game every time, and they rise to the occasion. And vice versa, right? You'll see some kids that are, when they play against weaker teams, they just feast on them and they can look really good. And then when they play against, and then you get other guys that they kind of blend in more, because it's not that competitive sometimes. Or you'll maybe see different attitudes on teams, right? Like that's why it's good to play against good medium and lesser level teams, because you see individual attitudes come in too, right?
So how, if we take it like more individually, how much do you think it affects kids in terms of like exposure. Like this is the biggest concern that people I hear people talk about from coming from dads, coaches, whatever. It's like you got to be in the Marlies tournament. You got to get into OHL Cup. You have to play against in the Michigan Loop against those teams or go to Chicago. Like how much do you yeah, in your opinion, how much how much do you think that actually affects how you're scouted, where you're scouted, whether or not scouts come to see you and those types of things? Because I find, like I said, that's the biggest question where people feel like they have to force it, you know?
Yeah. Yeah, no, that's a really good question. And if you would have asked me even a couple years ago, I would have said that it doesn't matter that much because if you're a good player, people see you and they take notice. But I've had a lot of conversations with a couple of GMs lately or over the last couple of years, and they as a year kind of drags on, when they're scouting and making the nitty gritty calls or looking for players, they want to see the better teams actually, and it makes sense. It makes sense. You have more guys to look at. So like I mean, if you have a good team, it does lend some positives to getting scouted. Now, providing that you're a high end player. I mean, you could some guys can blend in there, but like if you're a good player on a good team, it's probably going to help you. But that doesn't mean that if you're on on a weaker team that you haven't been looked at all. Like you get looked at, but like when it comes down to like you might end up if it's like questionable. Like I have a guy that was drafted. I'm not going to say who and where, but he was drafted early enough that it was like okay, that's a good pick. But there was a lot of doubt that guys talked to me about because of I wasn't the biggest guy and the team that it was just I would say poorly coached and they didn't win a lot and they were like lower level AAA, but he went fairly high in the draft. I think if he would have played on a team where it was very well coached, where there was a little bit more structure, where you could see, oh, away from the puck, he cares, and he cared, he just didn't know what to do. So when you're playing on a team that like everything goes wrong, it could be harder to find like your not your standout player because a guy that can carry the puck and do that or hit like crazy that sticks out. Um, but when so if I was if that kid had a choice last year, if he played on a team that was like a top 15 team in Ontario, let's say, he probably would have went just a little bit higher. But it didn't affect his draft status that much because he was pretty good. People saw what they needed to see. But at the end of the day, when it comes down to you're going to really hone in on your scouting, they're looking at like the deeper you go, it does make a little bit of a difference. Okay. But you still have to be good.
So this is now where I would, if we zoom, so let's say in the short term, wrapping up what you're saying is it could make some difference on the margins. Like if you're a good player, instead of you going fourth round, maybe you go second round, or instead of you not getting drafted, maybe you get drafted 12th round or whatever. But you still have to be good.
Yeah. Now, so like if you're like, and this is what a lot of kids do, right? Like, and this is, I think maybe your issue that what you're talking about is when people move teams and they feel like using the, like a GTHL team or what's it called? GTHL now? If you use a GTHL team as your measuring stick here in Ontario, and if you go like in some of the higher end programs or like the Marlies, the junior Canadians, let's say, and if you feel like, oh, if I can play there, I'll get drafted higher. Well, you got to also remember that if that's a top team, you may or may not be a top player. So that's a different thing. So maybe if you're if you're truly a fourth or a fifth round pick in the OHL, maybe you don't stand out that much. It's probably not going to make you a third round pick. It might help you a little bit, but flaws can be seen, right? Because you're playing with probably a couple first round picks on your team, second round picks and stuff like that. So you're just a little bit deeper in the depth chart.